All right, everybody. Hello. Welcome to week 8 of the semester. We are almost halfway through the semester. It's very exciting. To go along with the theme of this week, which is the development of Christianity as a uniquely Western religion, which is funny because it starts in the Near East, but it becomes the dominant religion of the West during the last couple centuries of Roman rule and also into the medieval period, and really up until the present period. Christianity is still the major religion of the West, wherever you go, pretty much. So, a mini lecture today, because I haven't done that in a couple weeks for you. We're going to look at the development of Christianity in a nutshell. And I'm going to try and put away my own biases as someone who follows this faith tradition. That I'm going to try and just dissect Christianity as a historical phenomenon and present that to you, rather than get into the nitty-gritty of theology and personal belief and all that stuff. Okay, so we're just looking at the history of Christianity. So this starts in the Roman province of Judea, or what becomes known as Palestine as well. The Romans call it Palestine, but Canaan, Judea is Israel, Palestine. It's all kind of interchangeable at the time that we're talking about this. Okay, so I'll be using those terms interchangeably. But anyway, the Romans conquered Judea in 63 BCE. It's part of the broader Roman Empire that starts to massively grow in the early imperial period. So by this point, we definitely have the Roman Empire in place. And in the waning years of the Republic, Roman control stretches all the way around the Mediterranean area, and this kind of dark area in the bottom right of your map is Judea. And to the Romans, it's this completely unimportant place. Like, they conquered it just because they could. Nothing really important comes from Judea. But it ends up being a very important source of religion and religious tradition and culture, as we will see in a bit. So, the way the Romans control this territory of Judea, or the territory of Palestine, partly it's through control of the Jewish temple, which is extremely important to Jewish life. The temple in Jerusalem is where the Spirit of God resides. Like, that's where Yahweh is in his, like, earthly, corporeal, well, not corporeal, but anyway, the part of him that's kind of hanging out on earth is believed to be in the Jewish temple, right? The Temple of Solomon. So the Romans control the temple by appointing the high priest, who then controls access to the temple and also other very important Jewish rituals like animal sacrifice. So by controlling the Jewish faith from behind the curtain, so to speak, the Romans maintain pretty strict control over occupied Judea. Right? They dominate the religious structure of the Jews, and this breeds a lot of resentment for understandable reasons. The Romans also appoint a puppet king. And by the time that we get to talking about Jesus, and by the time the Gospels start writing his story, King Herod is the kind of puppet king of the area of Judea. He's not very popular at all by the local Jewish population. This is because Herod is seen as an outsider. His family converted to Judaism. I think when Herod was like a kid, he's an outsider who is not seen as a legitimate king of the Jews. And so this also breeds a lot of resentment in occupied Palestine. So by the time we get to the story of Jesus, which really kicks off Christianity as we know it, there's this apocalyptic fervor that's consuming particularly the Judean countryside. Roman occupied Judea is just full of people running around that are zealots, meaning they're willing to go to extreme lengths for what they believe in this case, the Jewish faith, throwing off Roman rule, bringing salvation to the Jewish people. There are prophets a dime a dozen in occupied Judea, talking about a coming Messiah and the end of Roman rule and God's will being restored to his chosen people, the Jews. So that's the context in which we get Jesus of Nazareth. Now, again, I'm going to try and just talk about the historical things behind Christianity, because that's what's important here. Jesus was believed to have been born in the city of Bethlehem, or the town of Bethlehem, in the Judean countryside, but he's raised in Nazareth. So he's called Jesus of Nazareth. Nazareth is an extremely poor part of Roman Palestine. Like it's the armpit of, it's the backorder of the backwaters, right? It's basically the state of Mississippi. No one wants to go there voluntarily. Everyone wants to leave. There's really no point to Mississippi, just like there's no point to Nazareth. So the fact that Jesus comes, sorry if that offends anyone, there's really no, the fact that Jesus comes from one of the poorest parts of the Jewish homeland is a very powerful thing, because when he begins his ministry, which is, he kind of travels around Roman occupied Judea, and he teaches on moral lessons, about the inherent goodness of people, the will of God. He gives a lot. He tells a lot of stories and parables that have moral lessons in them, and he talks to the common people of Judea. He doesn't go and sit in the court of, the governor, the Roman governor of the province. Like he's out there preaching to the common people, and folks are drawn to him because he's from Nazareth, and he's one of them, right? He's this extremely smart guy that comes from Nazareth of all places, and this makes him kind of a celebrity, or at least someone worth listening to. So one of his kind of quintessential moral messages is the Sermon on the Mount, which is depicted here in the picture, where he goes to the top of this kind of hill and talks to a few thousand Jews about what it means to live a good moral life and to be honorable in the eyes of God. This is where he talks about praying for one's enemies. If someone strikes you, turn the other cheek, let them strike you again, rather than retaliating. Blessed be the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Right? Like he's preaching messages of hope and moral fortitude to the peasant class of Judea. Like he's from the working class. He himself was the son of a carpenter, and he comes from a very working class background, and that's where he focuses his ministry. He also spends a lot of time criticizing the Jewish priestly class, which are seen as kind of collaborators with Rome. And his criticism of the government, his criticism of the elites, eventually leads to his death. He is executed by the Roman state as being a threat, with the encouragement of the priests, the priestly class of Judea, because he's a rabble rouser and he's delegitimizing the government in the eyes of many Jews. So he's crucified, which is a Roman style of execution. It's very painful. It's reserved only for traitors and people who are conspiring against Rome itself. And there's this sign that's put above, kind of mocking Jesus, INRI, which is a Latin. It's kind of Latin abbreviation for "Here is Jesus, King of the Jews." Trying to kind of put this guy back in his place. So upon his death, Jesus becomes a martyr or a hero for the cause of Jewish, Jewish, I don't want to say nationalism, but for Jewish sovereignty. for the Jews being able to do the things that they want rather than bowing to Roman rule. In the eyes of some people, he's seen as more than just a martyr and a hero. He's seen as as the Messiah. Like, he was actually the Jewish Messiah that was long prophesied and the Jews have been waiting for. And the fact that he died doesn't really change that, because his was a spiritual salvation, not a physical salvation for Roman rule. We'll get into that in a little bit. That's where Christianity splits off from Judaism, is the embracing of Jesus as the Christ, as the Messiah, for one's soul, for one's spiritual well-being, rather than one's physical well-being. Even though he did do a lot of physical miracles and stuff, according to the Gospels. Jesus was more interested, according to Christianity, Jesus was more interested in saving people from hell and damnation than saving them from the Romans. So a few years after this, a few decades after Jesus dies, we get the Jewish revolt, and the Jewish temple is destroyed. The Jews do okay for a little while, revolting against Roman rule, but the legions come in and they destroy the temple, which still has not been rebuilt to this very day. The Wailing Wall in Jerusalem is the last kind of rubble pieces of the Temple of Solomon. And as a result of the Jewish way of life being obliterated from the inside out, many Jews leave Judea never to come back. They fan out across the world. This is why we have Jewish communities in Egypt, in other parts of the Middle East. We have Jewish communities in Eastern Europe, not too long after the diaspora, in Poland and Germany and Ukraine and Russia. That's how we eventually get Jews in New York City and Miami Beach, Florida. I mean, that's the diaspora. The diaspora is the fanning out, the spreading out of a people. And this is initiated after Judea is basically obliterated. And that's a result of the Romans clamping down on a revolt in around 70 AD. So anyway, back to Christianity. The early Christian traditions are put in place by a guy named Paul. Paul is a Jew, but he's also a Roman citizen. He spends his early adult life persecuting the first Christians, like the followers of Jesus, who still stuck around after Jesus was executed. Paul himself converts to Christianity, though. In the Bible, there's this story about how he is shown a vision, and he's spoken directly to Jesus speaks directly to Paul from like another spiritual plane of existence. And Paul converts to Christianity, and then he, as a Roman citizen, because he's a Roman citizen, he has a passport to travel pretty much wherever he wants throughout the Roman Empire. He goes around, he starts spreading the good news of Jesus. So he starts teaching people about this guy named Jesus Christ, who saved him, his soul, and Paul is single-handedly responsible for the construction of the early Christian church as we know it. A couple of the main tenets of the Christian faith that's baked into the early DNA of the religion because of Paul's writings. And Paul, by the way, ends up writing, more than half of the New Testament. I think it's like almost 3/4 of the New Testament are letters of Paul written to the various Christian communities around the Roman Empire. He teaches that salvation from one's sins is found through the resurrection of Jesus. So Jesus was killed by the Roman state, yes, but he is resurrected, and through that act of resurrection, he is offering eternal salvation to anyone who believes in Jesus as the Son of God and who is resurrected after his execution by the Roman state. So essentially, it's this idea, and many of you are probably familiar with this, watching this, that Jesus died to save the sins of humanity. That's basically one of Paul's early tenets of the Christian faith. Also, this salvation, this moral, spiritual salvation, is available to anybody. It's not just the elites. It's not just those who can afford animal sacrifices. That's kind of the old Jewish way. Paul is saying, no. This is a spiritual salvation that all anybody has to do is believe in Jesus, and you can go to heaven. So, and it's no matter what your race is, what your citizenship status is, whether you're Jewish or non-Jewish, doesn't matter. It's a universal belief system, which is what makes it so attractive in the Roman Empire. And Paul kind of uses this to his advantage. There are a couple contradictions, though, within this. There still is a lot of arguments over what exactly this salvation entails and how one achieves it. The Bible itself is contradictory on this fact, or on this point, rather. So take the book of Ephesians, chapter 2. For grace are you saved through faith, not that of yourselves. It's a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. In other words, you don't have to do anything to achieve the salvation of Jesus Christ. You just simply have to believe in Jesus as a resurrected Son of God. That's it. That's all you have to do. Compare that with the book of James, though, which comes later in the New Testament. In James chapter 2 says, see then how that by works a man is justified, not by faith only. Meaning, along with believing in Jesus, you have to live a good moral life. Like you can't just sit around, do whatever you want, and believe in Jesus and expect to go to heaven when you die. Like, you have to do good stuff on earth. You have to live a good moral life in order to justify being saved through the grace of God. So it's unclear exactly how one achieves this salvation, because the Bible itself offers different perspectives on this. And so part of this is because the rules of Christianity are being written after the fact. Like, they're being written after the death of Jesus himself. So the plane is being built as it's flying, right? Like, people after Jesus have to figure out exactly what he meant and what he tried to do. A lot of these clues can be found throughout the New Testament. The Gospels are the stories of Jesus, so it's like they're biographical stories of the man of Jesus. And this is a little, just to add to the complexity of the Christian faith and how just kind of open-ended it is. There are 4 Gospels. The first one, 4 canonical Gospels, I should say. There are other Gospels that aren't included in the Bible. But the 4 accepted ones are the Gospel of Mark, which, even though it comes second in the order of the New Testament, it's actually the first to be written. That's the earliest Gospel. It comes from around 70 CE or AD, whatever you want. It does not include an infancy narrative. There's no birth of Jesus born in the manger. The Christmas story, is not included in the book of Mark. There's no details on exactly what the resurrection and reappearing to his disciples, like, that comes later. We just see Jesus who dies at the end of Mark, and then depending on your version of Mark, there's different versions. Then we see the resurrection, and Jesus reappearing to his disciples, being like, hey, I'm not actually dead. I'm actually the Son of God. And there's different versions of this gospel. So this can be very confusing. Depending on how historically you want to look at this, it gets pretty tricky. We get the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, which are similar, but they're written independently from each other. About 20 years after Mark was written. And by the way, by the time, like, the book of Mark was written 40 years after Jesus died, which is a long time. Matthew and Luke are written about 60 years after the death of Jesus. So this is way, way, way after the fact. Here we have the traditional narratives of Jesus, born in a manger in Bethlehem and all that stuff, the Christmas story. Those are the kind of more important Gospels, Matthew and Luke, because they include the full story. And then we get the odd man out, which is John, which is written, 80 to 90 years after Jesus died. And that John is interesting because it's written from a way different perspective. It includes a lot of really cool miracles that Jesus was reported to have done during his ministry. So like bring someone back from the dead, turn water into wine. That's from the book of John. It's got some more exciting aspects of Jesus that aren't included in the other three Gospels. So, and then like I mentioned before, there are numerous Gospels that are non-canonical, meaning they're not included in the Bible. And all this means that from a historical perspective, and I'm not going to get into the personal aspect of this. That's up to you. From a historical perspective, Christianity is a very open-ended thing. Like you can read into the Gospels, the stories of Jesus, the rules of Christianity, Paul's writings, the other writings in the New Testament. You can see that Jesus meant many things to many different people. It's a very open-ended religion, which is why there's like 10,000 denominations of Christianity to this day. Real quick on a few words on the Christian worldview. It's one that believes in a natural world and a supernatural world. That's not entirely different than like Greek and Roman traditions. They perhaps believe that the gods more lived among men, but Christians definitely believe there's like a natural plane of existence that we can see and smell and touch, and a supernatural, which it's almost like a different dimension, where there are beings that exist that we can't contemplate, that we can't comprehend. Demons, Satan is kind of put forward as the main enemy of the Christian faithful. And these dark forces conflict with the forces of good in the natural world. But we just can't see where the sources of these forces come from because they're beyond human understanding. There's a strong belief in the sacred power of words and symbolism through objects. So a prayer is very powerful in the Christian tradition. The Eucharist, or what Protestants call communion, is extremely important. It's the symbolic taking of the Last Supper that's described in the Bible. Transubstantiation is I'm not going to get into that. That's a Catholic belief that the bread and the wine in the Eucharist literally become the blood and the body of Christ. We don't need to talk about that. This video is running along already. So there's different traditions. There's different rituals. There's different symbolisms in Christianity. There's a lot of emphasis on the individual experience through prayer and trying to connect one's self to God. And this is called mysticism. We see Paul do this a lot throughout the Bible. The Martyr of Perpetua, which is one of your documents, your primary source documents for this week. There's a woman who multiple times in this document prays and enters into this mystical experience with God. And you'll see what I mean once you start reading that document. And once again, I want to stress that it's important that from the get-go, this is a universal religion. It's open to everybody. It's not just for Jews. It's not just for, for Greeks. It's not just for Romans or Roman citizens. It's open for all people. So, all right, really quick, I'm going to close this out. Christianity eventually becomes the dominant religion of the Roman Empire. It kind of happens overnight. But it takes a long time. It takes many centuries for that to happen. It happens overnight with Constantine, which we'll talk about in just a second. The Christianity gains a lot of adherents. It's victorious over, I suppose, other pagan, what they call pagan belief systems. Early church leaders aren't quite sure on how to organize the faith. After the Gospels, after Paul, after these guys are dead, it's like, what do we do? How do we? What is Christianity? Who gets to lead it? Is this a very local faith that's like, well, the rules of it depend on the local church, or the local teacher? Or is this a more centralized faith? What's their relationship with political power? Who gets to call the shots? Is it the Roman emperor who gets to decide? because the Roman emperor is kind of the high priest of the Roman religion. Should he be the high priest of Christianity as well? Or does that more belong with like middling church leaders like bishops? This is an open question in the beginning. The basic teaching, is there one path to Christianity, or are there many paths? Are there many different truths within this greater truth of God's love and forgiveness? This is where we get the development of orthodoxy, meaning, mainstream, the rules, like the accepted way, and heresy. Eventually we start to see the separation of different Christian beliefs as heretical and worthy of punishment by the Orthodox. And then, anyway, all this kind of helps get solved in some parts anyway, when the Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century converts to Christianity. He himself, like the emperor, like it takes a couple hundred years for Christianity to actually become accepted by the ruling classes, the state of Rome. But when it does, overnight, there's this toleration suddenly for Christianity, whereas it once was seen as a threat to Roman stability. And so 10 years after Constantine the Great kind of accepts Christianity himself, it becomes the official religion of Rome. And then things get pretty crazy from there on. There are lots of different rules put in place. Things will shift, as we'll talk about over the course of the semester. All right, guys, this has been a very long video, longer than I wanted. If you've watched the whole thing, thank you for bearing with me. You're a champ. And you'll be in good standing for taking the quiz this week. All right, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you guys. Bye.